Oh, so how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Yeah, all good, Darren. All
Yeah,
fine. Just another early. Well, it's not early. It's 9:15 in the morning over here,
of course.
and
Where are you then?
I live just north of Boston. Do you know where
Oh,
Boston is on the map? So I'm
yeah.
about 20 minutes north of Boston, just right on the Atlantic coast. I can
Oh, okay.
can go walk down to the beach and imagine England about several thousand miles away.
Yeah. So, with all this pandemic, how are things over there at the minute?
Things are not great. I mean, similar, probably, well, worse than Europe even. And I just do my work from home, and I don't do too much else. I think
Yeah,
that's the way of it for most of us at the moment.
yeah.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
we'll get straight into the FIFA stuff now then.
Good man. Yeah.
So how did you get into commentary in the first place? What sort of got you into it?
Well, I'd always wanted, from being a young kid in Aberdeen, to broadcast. It was just a passion of mine. And when I was 7 in 1974, my family bought our first ever cassette recorder. And people who are younger don't know what a cassette recorder really is. But it was quite a revolutionary device back then. And the idea of putting our voices on tape and recording our voices, I mean, that was something we had never imagined doing.
Hmm.
So that was really where it all began. And I would take my portable cassette recorder into the park and to school, and I would just commentate on games. And then from there, I went to reserve matches of Aberdeen, my local club, and then first team games. And from that point on, realized that I really wanted to do more and more with it. I wrote to my hero, who was a fellow called David Francie, who was the voice of Scottish football on radio back in the 1970s. And he was great with me. He sort of got into a correspondence with me and gave me some great advice. One of the things he suggested was working for hospital radio, volunteer situation for patients in hospital, broadcasting football in my case, but also some other things. And then I did that until I was 19, and I got my big break at the BBC. And it was thanks to David Francie, my hero. I wrote to him again. This time he sent my tapes on to his bosses at the BBC. And to cut a long story short, they gave me a chance on the air. And that was 1986. And here we are 34 years later, and I'm still doing it. So I've been very lucky. You have to be lucky to get into it, but I love what I do, and I don't take it for granted.
Yeah. So when it came to doing the FIFA commentary, did someone obviously heard you come to think, oh, we need somebody like you to come and do? How did you get into the FIFA side of the gaming side of it?
Well, with FIFA, obviously you have to be invited. It's a very prestigious game, as you know, and it's played by so many people around the world. And it already happened in a hurry back in 2017. I had just left the UK. I'd been living in London. I was living in West London. And we decided that we were going to move back here to the USA, where we'd been before, and that I was going to freelance and bounce around different broadcasting entities. That was what I really wanted to do. And then out of the blue, we got this approach from a third party initially. It was a bit mysterious. It didn't say exactly who it was, but it was a video game company, and they were interested in me and my voice and my work. And could we have a chat sometime? And it emerged a few days later that that video game company was EA Sports, and it was the big one, FIFA. And they had, well, at that point, they hadn't actually finalized the deal, but they, I think, pretty much knew they were going to get rights to the Champions League and the Europa League. Now, my voice around the world is fairly well known as a Champions League voice because I used to be the main commentator for the Champions League on ESPN in multiple countries. Not the UK, because ESPN didn't have rights in the UK, but if you think about all of Africa, Australia, New Zealand, USA, Canada, the Americas, Middle East, a big chunk of the world.
Hmm.
So they had done their homework, and they had decided that my voice was one that they quite fancied having on the game. But the only thing was, Darren, I couldn't really tell anybody at that time because it all had to be a secret until it could be officially announced. But meanwhile, I started recording, and it was great fun. It remains great fun. And it was only in June of 2018, just before the World Cup, that it was officially announced.
Hmm. So was it difficult not being able to say anything? Because obviously, being it quite a popular game, you have people, I know, tweeting you and getting in contact with you, sort of trying to get some of the goals. How do you approach those sort of questions and comments from people saying, what's happening next season?
Well, I think with anything, and this is true of life in general, you have to respect the people that you work for and respect the fact that there are contracts and you can't always, spill the beans. You
Yeah,
have to, agree to that you don't necessarily have control over telling the world. And that's been true of my TV career as well. There have been times when I've agreed with particular broadcasters to cover a tournament maybe 8 months ahead of time, but I can't say I'm doing it until they want to announce it. That's on their timetable.
yeah,
And so you have to be good at that. And with FIFA, it was actually quite easy because my work has always been traveling anyway. So I didn't have to necessarily tell people why I was traveling to do a particular thing. It's just, I traveled to do many different things on the broadcasting front. But I think it was, it was a pleasant surprise, obviously, to a lot of people, a lot of friends of mine who I couldn't tell. My wife knew about it and close family knew about it, but not many others beyond that. So it was something that I did have to keep a closely guarded secret.
I don't think I've been able to do that, so I wouldn't be able to do that job. I'd be trying to,
Would you not? No?
no,
No?
I think I'll probably give away too many secrets by
Yeah.
accident.
We're all guilty of that at times, but I was very careful, and yeah, so nobody found out, nobody knew about it until June of that year, until 2018.
So with like the sound bites, because obviously different scenarios in the game, it's very different each one.
Yeah.
How were you able to put your own input into the script, or was it all just down to the game writers?
No, it's very much my input. What I would say though is it's a team, and it's think about it like a football team. You have a centre back and a right back and a central midfielder and sometimes a creative central midfielder and maybe a couple of strikers. There are many different people who have big roles to play with regard to the production of FIFA, and I just see it that my job is one of those roles. It might be a high profile role, certainly, but it's no more or less important than the person who is coming up with some of the ideas for the sound design. They are really important in terms of how it's all done, and all the other jobs. I mean, there are thousands of people who are involved in making FIFA on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
But yeah, what happens really is that they will give me the idea, the concept, and then what they want is for me to put it into my own words, because they do want it to sound like me. Now, there are times when maybe it won't as much, because if you think about it, we have to, to avoid repetition, we have to come up with many different ways of saying something. So I'll give you an example, Darren. If there's a free kick just outside the box and it goes just over the bar, think about maybe 15 or 16 ways of saying that. It's quite difficult, isn't it, to come up with 15 or 16 different
Yeah,
ways.
imagine.
So I'll come up with my own, what I would, authentically say if I were on TV. There are times when the production team will say, well, here's an idea, maybe you could say this just to give it a bit more variety. And we kick it back and forth. And that's what I love about it, is that it really is teamwork. And we all support each other. We're all there for each other. And we just try to make the game come to life as much as possible that way.
Yeah. So obviously working alongside the legendary, obviously Arsenal player Lee Dixon,
Yes.
what's it? Because obviously you both got your own different ways of your inputs. What's it like working together? Because you bounce off each other. When you hear on FIFA and you bounce off each other. What's it like working together in the studio?
Well, Lee's a great guy, and I know he's a special guy to you.
Mm.
And, I knew him. It was interesting. We actually used to live about a quarter of a mile away from each other in London when I was living in London. So I would occasionally, bump into him just walking around our neighborhood. And obviously in TV, you have, mutual friends and all the rest of it. So it's quite a close-knit community. But I had left the UK. I was, living in the US. And so when I heard I was going to be working with Lee, I was delighted, because he's, first of all, as I said, a great guy, but also a really good TV pro and somebody who's been around the TV scene for a while. And, we know him as a terrific footballer, but he's become a broadcast professional in his own right. And I think what producers of a video game look for is a bit of contrast in styles. They look for a team that's not, you don't really want two voices that sound exactly the same or two people who come at it from the same perspective. And his job is to really come at it as the footballer in the game. Albeit he's a broadcast professional, but with more of the sort of the footballing input, whereas I'm a lead commentator. And yeah, we have a lot of great laughs doing it. And there are times when, not everything goes right, when, we say something that we didn't mean to say and we have to do it again. And, but as I say, we have great people that we work with, our producer, our sound man, who's been doing this a long, long time with the FIFA game. And we just really work with each other and think about teamwork all the time. And, there've been times when we've been side by side doing it. There've been other times when we're not side by side doing it, when I might do my parts in it and they'll get edited down so that when Lee comes in, he can hear what I've said and he can bounce off them, and the same the other way around. So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying it's teamwork between the both of us.
Yeah. So out of I'll sort of go into some of the other bits, but what is your favorite comment that you say? Because everyone's got a little favorite of what you two say. I mean, do you have a particular part that you like saying on the game, or?
I don't know. I mean, I probably get tired of hearing myself if I if I listen to it too much. The one that I used to get a lot of feedback from, and I don't know if it's actually in the new version of the game because I don't have control over what is in the game and what is not. But I used to say there was one I used to use that would say something like. There's no stopping them today. Absolutely omnipotent. That was one that I used to use quite a lot. But actually, when I say I used it quite a lot, I used it once. And that's the interesting thing. I'll do it once, but I don't know how often it's going to get played in the game. So people always say to me, why do you always say omnipotent? I say, well, I said it once. But that might be one. From this year's game, I'm trying to think what one of my favorite lines might be. I'll come back to you on that one.
Yeah,
Because,
no, that's fine.
yeah, it's an interesting one.
So obviously with because obviously you do the German league as well for
Yes.
commentary stuff. Um, was it difficult to learn the different names? Because obviously pronouncing the names, especially on FIFA, because so many of them. How did you keep up with all the names? How to learn each of the names? Because obviously, especially the long foreign names, it's very difficult to pronounce. How did you get around that one?
Well, I'm really glad you've asked me that question because it's amazing how many people out there just sort of assume that we, make up names or we sort of have a best guess. But I have a languages background, so I studied languages when I was younger, and in particular, you mentioned Germany. Spent a lot of time in Germany, and I have a routine for how I go about the names. So what will happen is they'll give me a list in advance of the names we're going to do on a particular day, and that might be, 50 pages worth of names, so it could be 1,000 names, let's just say. And, there'll be a lot of them, Smith and Jones and, names like that obviously don't need any research. But, there are names that do need research. And so what I do is every night beforehand, I just go down my list and I have my own system for doing it. I've got contacts in different countries who can help me. I've got languages I speak myself, so I can make that judgment myself. Or what I'm finding increasingly useful now is to be able to go online and actually finding the player saying his own name himself. And there's more and more of that. And failing that, what I look for is an interviewer from that player's country talking to the player and introducing him by name. And there's that. There also are other, sources that anybody can use online simply by punching in a name and getting the authentic pronunciation from that country. So I spend a lot of time over that. And, I won't lie to you that there are a lot of people who I think don't like to hear names pronounced authentically because especially in England, I would say they're used to hearing names pronounced sort of what is maybe an English approximate way. But my philosophy on this is quite different. My philosophy is that I want, if that player is playing the game, and I know that they all play the game. I
Mm,
want that player to say, "Oh, that commentator, he knows how to say my name, and he's saying it as I say it." Imagine if if you were in a different country and
mm,
you heard your own name being mispronounced every day of the week. That would get a bit old, wouldn't it?
yeah,
You get a bit
definitely.
tired of that.
Yeah.
So, for example, with Manchester United's Portuguese rising superstar, that's the one I hear about all the time now. I didn't hear about it at all before he moved to Manchester United because I had done his game for FIFA 19 originally, and
Mm,
in Portugal, and the way he says his name himself, it's Bruno Fernandes. Bruno Fernandes. You might have heard that if you
yep.
the game. And a lot of people say, well, "Why are you calling him Bruno Fernandes?" I say, "Well, it's quite simple. That's what he calls himself." So what I tend to do is I'll send those people a little clip of Bruno himself saying his name, and that should shut somebody up. But you'd be amazed. A lot of people don't even stop there. They'll say, "Well, but that's not how we say it." And I'll say, "Well, I don't really care. That's how he says it. So I'm going to be true to him rather than to what you might want him to be called."
Yeah. So with obviously there's a lot of pressure with commentating in the real match. Is it the same for FIFA, or is it more relaxed in the studio than it is out of?
By the way, Darren, these are great questions. These are really cracking questions. So thank you for asking. Um, there's pressure, yeah, but it's a different kind of pressure because if you think about it, in a game, you kind of have to call everything right, and you're really concentrating on what is in front of you. With FIFA, we do it over several hours. There is pressure because we have to get through a certain amount of content every day when we're recording,
Mhm,
and we don't want to fall behind on that. And the pressure is more, things like, is the voice going to last? Because um, if you imagine we're doing 6 hours and some of it is loud, up content, so to speak, high goal shouts,
mm,
and when you're doing that, you have to always be mindful of how the voice is sounding. And as I said, my sound man, Pete, is very good about being able to gauge when we're at the stage where the voice is not quite of the same quality as it was maybe at the start of the day. So that's more where the pressure is. Obviously, you're thinking as well because, you know, it's, as I say, it's not a scripted exercise. It's more of a concept exercise. So it's, here is the situation. Here's roughly the idea, and then as a commentator, I have to then deliver it. I have to come out with things that make sense
mm,
that can be used in the game. And usually I don't dry up with that. Usually I do have the ideas sort of flooding in my head when it
mm,
comes to trying to do these things. But as I said earlier, the challenge is saying something that is different but still sounds authentic,
mm,
because really there are only so many ways you can say something. And I think also in the game we want to make sure that we don't have a line that maybe jars because it does sound a little bit different, and if you hear
mm,
that over and over and over again, that might get a bit tired for people. So it's striking that balance, but it's a wonderfully creative process. And
mm.
I'm always kind of thrilled when people come back and say, "Oh, I really like the way you say that in the game." And I know that there are some people who will get tired of hearing certain things, but that's the nature of it with a video game.
Yeah. So with how fever's changing and then how it's affecting sort of, especially like the younger the generation, do you think fever will sort of extend sort of to the wider, even like because you have the older playing, you have the younger playing it. Um, but do you get any sort of like feedback from like the younger generation, and what sort of feedback do you get from people?
Um, well, it's difficult because on social media now, what I notice is, I mean, I'm in my 50s, and I notice that younger people address their ideas in a different way. I was always very sort of polite and a bit bashful about ever expressing an opinion to somebody, but I noticed that younger people just sort of come out with it and they just sort of say it. There's not a lot of standing on ceremony. I don't know. I think that I would say that it just varies according to the person.
Mm,
Social media is a hard thing to go by because it's not a very polite forum in itself. A lot of
mm,
people are, and we all run into this. A lot of people are quite rude, but there are some lovely people on social media too. There are some genuinely really nice people, and
yeah,
you've got to sort of filter out the noise, I think, when you're going through that kind of thing. Um, I think what will be interesting about video games is, and this is just an observation, where they are in 20 years' time, because I'm kind of the wrong generation for video game playing, because I didn't grow up with video games. They just weren't a thing when I was in my teens or even in my 20s. But somebody who's maybe, 40, somebody who's maybe, 15 years or so younger than I am, they very much did grow up with the video game concept. So perhaps when they're in their 50s and 60s, they'll still be playing video games. I'm sort of the cutoff generation, maybe the last generation that didn't really, have this thing of playing
Yeah.
video games. But they're undoubtedly a huge part of life now. And I think during the pandemic, especially, they have probably become, even more popular as people, look for things to do and are at home much more than they were. And, goodness knows how things are going to go over the course of the winter, if that will be multiplied several times over. But yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty popular Christmas present this year. I'm sure.
So, would you be sort of looking into doing other EA Sports gaming sort of side of things, or is it just FIFA you're sort of more?
Well, I'm a football commentator first and foremost, so I would imagine for me that this is it really on the video game front. I don't think, if you look at other commentators in other sports, there aren't that many who have sort of deviated from one game to another on the sporting front. And I just view it that I'm very lucky to do it. This is my run at it, and you don't expect to do it forever. You don't take it for granted, because understandably with video games, the producers of it want to freshen up the content every so often. But what I can say to you, Darren, is that I go into every session putting my absolute heart and soul into it. I mean, I give it everything. And that's from a concentration point of view, from a creative standpoint, from trying to give the audience my best and trying to be passionate about it and trying to make it something memorable for the people who are playing the game. I don't go into any job with half measures that way. And so it's absolutely the same for FIFA. And so 19, 20, and now 21, all with Lee. And as I say, it's great fun. And it's something that I really do enjoy. And I have a smile on my face when I go in, and I still have that smile on my face when I come out.
Well, what I can say, you do a brilliant job. The both of you do a brilliant job on it, so I can't fault you for that one.
Well, you're very kind, Darren, and we do appreciate your comments that you fire through on social media,
Yeah.
and they mean a lot. So yeah, you're a
Yeah.
great guy that way.
So going on to the little bit on the football side,
Yeah.
how are you seeing how the Premier League is at the moment compared to the German league? What's your input and view on that one at the minute?
Well, I think that it's really fascinating, because I've been obviously following, leagues for years and years and years, and I've watched them go up and go down, and things are very much cyclical. I think, you have eras where one league appears to be the best league in the world, and others are trying to catch up. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I first moved to the USA in the 90s, I was living here in the Boston area. And at that time, you could have made the argument that Serie A was the best league in the world. And I used to go to the Italian coffee shops and have my cappuccino and sit and watch what I thought was the best football in the world back then from Serie A. Then I think the Premier League moved in and got better and better and got more compelling to a wider audience. And I think you had those Premier League years, for a long spell, even though maybe initially they weren't reflective of English teams doing brilliantly in the Champions League. That changed from, around 2005, you might say, and sort of for a few years after that. But then you got to look at, I think sometimes we underestimate La Liga and how good it has been and how good Real Madrid and Barcelona have been for a long time, those two clubs in particular, but all the Spanish teams who've won the Europa League, Sevilla in particular. So I think it comes and it goes. You could have said in 2013 the Bundesliga, because it was an all-German final between Bayern and Dortmund. So it kind of goes up and down. I have a preference for the Bundesliga, and a lot of it is cultural and is just a sort of a love of Germany and a love of the dynamic of German football. I do like, and I think a lot of people are attracted by the fact that German football just seems to be a bit younger and hungrier, younger players. Dynamic. If you go as a fan to a German game, and obviously no fans are going to any game at the moment, but in normal times when you go as a fan to a game in Germany, it's a different experience. It's cheaper, It's more of a community thing. It's not as corporate as the Premier League. So those are the things I like about German football. Now, there are things I like, love about the Premier League too. And there's no doubt it sort of keeps you on your toes as a viewer, because there is that element of uncertainty most of the time. You do get years where one team will run away with it and you sort of say, well, this isn't as exciting as it sometimes can be. This season, it's just all over the place, isn't it, in terms of the table? And it's almost as though it's kind of upside down when you look at who's top, who's second, who's 10th, where Arsenal are. I'm talking to an Arsenal fan here, where Arsenal, it's all just a little bit sort of higgledy-piggledy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the charm of it. And, it's undeniably the fact that great players continue to gravitate towards the Premier League.
Yeah. So what's been like your most memorable match that you've seen, Premier League or German? What's been the one that stand out for you?
Well, can I choose a Champions League game or?
You can choose whichever.
Well, the best game, Darren, that I've ever commentated on, and I was just very lucky to be in the right place at the right time, was 2005 in Istanbul in Turkey, when Liverpool faced AC Milan in the final of the Champions League. And I traveled all the way from the States for that one. And of course, you might remember at halftime, it was 3-0 to Milan. And I thought Milan at that time were the class of European football. I really did. I thought they were the team that everybody else needed to look up to, because they were sensational. And they absolutely ripped Liverpool to shreds in that first half. But then, led by Steven Gerrard, Liverpool got themselves back into it, and 3-1, 3-2, 3-3, even though the penalty was a penalty by Xavi Alonso that was saved by Gida, the goalkeeper, but then he followed up to score. And, as a commentator, you can imagine, I couldn't believe the material I had in front of me. I'm thinking, this is now becoming, and you're always conscious of history as a commentator, this is becoming the best European final of all time. Yeah. And I still say it has to go down as the best European final of all time. Went to penalties in the end, and Liverpool, down and almost out, somehow became champions of Europe. And I think what was especially pleasing about that one was that, it's maybe hard for a young person listening to this now, but Liverpool then were not the Liverpool of now. Liverpool were really plucky underdogs at best. They were maybe the fifth best team in England at the time. They were not as good as Manchester United, Arsenal, Chelsea, maybe the fourth best. That was about it. But a distant fourth, you would have said, if you were analysing them honestly. So, yeah, I mean, that one stands out. I did have a game in Germany 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago. Well, 3 years ago this month, yeah, that came close to it. And that was the big derby between Dortmund and Schalke, which is my favourite fixture anywhere in the world. And so I was lucky enough to be there that day. And the reason why that was so special was it was 4-0 to Dortmund at half-time. And I was thinking, again, this is going to be a runaway victory. And Schalke came back to draw 4-4. And they equalised with just about the last kick of the game. So that's the closest one. I would normally put that even ahead of Liverpool, but of course it was just a league game and not a Champions League final. But those two are the ones that really stand out. And as I say, as a commentator, you just have to be lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, because obviously we've got one of the top world. Well, you got Lewandowski, who's like one of the. He's a beast on that field. Have you ever met Lewandowski? Have you met any of the teammates from the German teams, and what they like to approach?
No, I've not met him properly. I mean, only in sort of the passing with other people and other journalists, but I've not had the pleasure. It's funny, as a commentator, I often, you get to meet these guys once their careers are over. So I could probably tell you a lot more about players, of Lee Dixon's era, who are no longer players and obviously now are freer to talk about their careers. It's my one regret nowadays, in comparison, I think, with the older generation of players, the clubs make it very difficult for outsiders to really get to know the players. They are kind of cocooned a little bit. And there are one or two exceptions. There are people who you do get to know, sort of just bouncing around tunnels and in stadiums and things like that. But most of them are sort of wrapped in cotton wool, and it's only later, once their careers are over, once they get into the media, that they, really become sort of open to you getting to know them. And a lot of that comes down to, who you work with as a co-commentator. People like Michael Owen, who I've worked with, and Owen Hargreaves, who are great players. And, there was no way you could know them while they were in the middle of their careers. But then you get to see the person beyond that, not just the footballer that you've commentated on.
Mm. So did you ever play football when you were younger, and what sort of player were you when you were a kid, when you were growing up?
You don't want to know anything about my football career, Darren. There's a reason why I got into commentary. There's a reason why early on I decided that I wanted to talk about the game, because my footballing ability was all here rather than in my feet. But no, I mean, seriously, I played enthusiastically like everyone else. I was a left back. Not a particularly good one, but I played, for the school team and local games. But I had a knee problem early on, and I still have, this knee problem that doesn't really restrict me on a day-to-day basis, but it sort of ruled out playing football on a proper sustained basis. But to be honest, my love was really much more in talking about it, was finding words to try to bring the game out. And I think that's something that if you can discover that about yourself, there are so many ways for young people to be involved in football. And yeah, the dream is always to play it. But I've been lucky enough to be able to live my own dream and follow the sport that we all love as a commentator.
Yeah. So obviously, talking about Lee himself, what is he the Joker? Because he seems the type of person to be a Joker. I'm being careful because I know he might watch this. I don't know. But is he quite the Joker in person, or is he sort of quite work focused, or is he a bit of both on the side of things?
Well, he's both, and
Yeah.
I think what you see is what you get with Lee. I mean, when you see Lee on TV, that is Lee Dixon. There
Yeah.
is nothing inauthentic about Lee. He's, and I imagine he would have been that way as a player as well. He knows how to lighten the mood with a comment. He knows how to do that. He's got a dry Mancunian sense of humor, I would say. I think that's probably fair. It's not a sort of in-your-face humor, but he's a very good teammate. And I think everybody would say that. Anybody else who works with Lee, and he works for a number of different entities on TV in the UK and for NBC in the USA, and he's loved and valued, by everyone on TV. So he's a really great guy, and I've enjoyed getting to know him. And that's part of our job, is sort of understanding each other so that we set each other up a little bit, or react to each other in a way that is authentic.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's all the questions. I think really it's nice getting to know you and getting to know about the background side of FIFA as well. Um, are you doing the FIFA 22, or can you not mention that?
Well, we only do things year by year, Darren. So yeah, there's no. Obviously, I've done 19, 20, and 21, and yeah, we'll see what the future holds.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time out to speak with me. It's been a real pleasure and honour speaking to you.
Well, thank you for having me, Darren, and the best to you. And I want you to know that there are a lot of people on social media who are always rooting for you, and very much appreciate what you do. So keep being yourself, and know that you have friends in a lot of places.